Hello and welcome once again to the Spouter-Inn. I'm Chris.
And I'm Suzanne.
And lately, I've been reading Peter Hujar's Day by Linda Rosenkrantz.
And I've been reading On Elizabeth Bishop by Colm Tóibín.
So listeners, please get yourself a comfy drink, pull up a seat, and join us for a conversation about these books and more here at the Spouter-Inn.
Your voice is sounding a little deeper and more sultry than usual.
That's because I've got a cold. I'm getting over a cold.
Well, I hope you're better soon, but I have to say I really enjoy the FM voice. It's really great.
It's fun. You know, it's fun when your voice is a little different sometimes, especially if it's not just like painful. This is not painful, so I'm fine with that. But yeah, it is a little different. Mm-hmm. So there you go. But being sick, it does make reading a little difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh, well. I wanted to talk about something before we started up. Last time I was reading Voyage Around My Room, and my copy of Voyage Around My Room is from New Directions from a while ago. I think it's from the 80s or 90s was when it was originally published. And it's a really lovely, small book that very easily fits in your hand. It's smaller than a mass market paperback book for sure. And I guess also, mass market paperbacks are not being made anymore.
I know. I'm shocked about this.
It's so strange, but I guess, I don't know. I guess airport books aren't a thing in the time of e-readers. I don't know.
I know. It's such a bummer because sometimes you like a large size, large format hardcover book. That can be a really wonderful thing on your shelf. But there's something very, I don't know what to call it. Not visceral. That's the wrong word, but like very tactile and like, I don't know. Emotional is the wrong word too. Like feels right to hold a book of a certain size in your hand. Do you know what I mean? Like
absolutely.
In fact, the book that we're going to be talking about, or I'm going to be talking about a little bit later on, Tóibín's On Elizabeth Bishop, is a book that I have because I was in the Provincetown bookstore. I think it was the summer before last, and I was with some people who were in a hurry to go, and I just picked up this book, and it felt just so right in my hand.
Yeah.
It was not a real rational decision. I mean, I like Elizabeth Bishop's poetry, and I thought, this might be a good book. But it wasn't rational at all. It was just like, it feels right. And to think that that's going to be something more rare to experience is a very bad thing.
I just thinking about little books and how lovely they can be to hold. First off, because little books also promise the idea that you'll be able to read a book in one sitting, which isn't certainly not a requirement for a good book, but it's so pleasurable when you actually get to do that. Mm-hmm. But also that they're very convenient, especially if you can literally fit them in a pocket, or I suppose a purse more easily. I have two little books that I've quite cherished, and I think you'd be keen on both of them. In fact, you might even have one of them because they're both by an author that we both love, Gertrude Stein.
Yeah.
Her book, How to Write.
Yes, I have that one.
You have the little Dover edition?
The little tiny, I think it's pink, isn't it?
It's purple in my copy, but there might be pinkish versions as well. But yeah.
I bought it when I was in college.
The Dover Classics edition, the type is kind of tiny and terrible, but it's also very good and clear at the same time. Mm-hmm. And it's very satisfying. It's a little wider than a mass market paperback, I suppose, but it's very squat. And it's just nice. It's just nice to hold. It really feels delightful.
It's Gertrude Stein shaped.
It kind of is, yes. And the other one I've got is a book of hers called The World is Round.
I have that one too. It's like a pink cover and it's got the sort of circular kind of designs on it. Is that the same one you have?
Mine is a little bit different. I guess it's yellow and does have a circle on the cover with illustrations. It's got illustrations throughout, but it's The World is Round is the one that has rose is a rose in it. And it also is child friendly, let's say. You could read it to your child if you want them to grow up interesting, and you probably do want that. But yeah, it's incredibly small. It sort of fits in the L that I make with my index finger and thumb, if you see what I mean. Mm-hmm. Fits nicely in that and easily fits into a pocket. And there was a time when I was ridiculous enough that I would carry this in my pocket to read while I was waiting for somebody to come for a first date or something.
Oh, neat.
Terrible, pretentious book to be reading on a first date, this little children's edition Gertrude Stein, but also just a gorgeous little companion to have with you. So I don't know. Small books are great.
Yeah, but like what you said about that, a companion to have with you, that is what they feel like. You know, when I was describing that feeling of picking up that book in the store, it was like you'd as likely leave a friend in the store as you'd leave that behind. Like it's that feeling. It's a strange thing.
I mean, you know, it's also nice to buy a doorstop occasionally. It really feels like you're going to do something with it. It's going to be there for you. It's a different emotional connection. It's not only tiny books that have a sort of physical emotional connection for us, but the tiny books are very special.
Another time we should talk about really big books.
Yeah. So then I go and I make another cup of coffee and 2 pieces of toast with raspberry jelly. And now I'm going to call Allen Ginsberg at exactly noon because he does his meditations, and they told me to call him either at 11 at night or after 12. So it's exactly 12, and I call him, and it's busy. I go and put my red jacket on, and I go down and get cigarettes. I break a $10 bill, and I give her a penny because the cigarettes are 56 cents. So Peter Hujar's Day is a small book. It's not physically that small, but it's very thin. It's only, let's see, the text of it is 30-something pages. Yeah, it doesn't take too long to read. You can read it in one sitting, and I very happily did. And I picked it up a while back. It's one of those books I mentioned many episodes ago when it was Independent Bookstore Day, and I went on a huge shopping spree. I think it was back in April, and I was at a store and I saw this on the shelf. I hadn't heard of it. I didn't even know who Peter Hujar was, and I thought it looked really interesting. It was a transcript of everything that Hujar did on one day back in 1974, and I bought it, and the clerk at the bookstore said, "Oh, that book is amazing." And I thought, oh, that'll be very good. And then, of course, being me, many, many months later, I actually took off the shrink wrap and started reading it. And I thought, yeah, this book is really interesting. Let me put a little context for this. So Linda Rosenkrantz was born in 1934. She is still with us, age 91. She was born in the Bronx in New York City, and her job has mostly been to work as an arts writer and editor, especially, for art collectors, for magazines, for art collectors. But in the mid-'60s, she wrote a novel called Talk, which she created in an unusual way. She spent the summer of 1965 carrying a tape recorder around with her and recording all sorts of conversations, building up a massive amount of tape. It was 1,500 pages of transcripts, which she then edited down to a novel, to 250 pages of nothing but conversation, of transcribed dialogue between the 3 characters that she'd settled on that she found the most interesting, each of whom was given a pseudonym, 2 women and a man. And so it becomes this sort of nonfiction novel of these 3 young artsy New Yorkers talking about sex, neuroses, food, their dreams, all that stuff.
How interesting. Have you taken a look at that book?
I did poke about it a bit, and it's very readable. It's very fun. It's very beachy. I think it would be a great book to read at the beach, especially because they're mostly talking at the beach. So it's very charming. But that's not the book that I came to talk about, of course. She became interested in what else could be done with this idea of just, recording conversations with interesting people. So in 1974, she decided to ask several of her artist friends to keep a record of everything they did over the course of one particular day, and then she would record and transcribe a conversation with them about it, maybe the following day. This project didn't really go very far. Her interview with the artist Chuck Close was eventually published, but that was about it until 40 years later, when she rediscovered the transcription of the conversation she'd had with the photographer, Peter Hujar. The recording was long gone. And this was published as a book in 2021. So the book is, it's got to be lightly edited. There's no ums or uhs in it. Like they've smoothed that much out, but they don't seem to have smoothed out much more than that. It definitely feels like a conversation. It feels like threads get picked up and get dropped and interruptions happen and so forth over the course of it. It's very natural, and it doesn't build to anything, let's say. It is just, what did he do on December 18th, 1974? So what did he do? Well, he was an up-and-coming photographer. He has a meeting with an editor from Elle magazine. And then his big task for the day is going to be his first job for the New York Times. He's got to take a photograph of the poet Allen Ginsberg for an article. This proves to be a little tricky because Ginsberg hears that he's from the Times and does not trust that. So he can't really make any good connection with Ginsberg, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a bit. What else happens? He talks with his friend Susan Sontag on the phone. He's hoping she'll write an introduction to a book that he's hoping to put together. He eats a little food. Linda, in the conversation, worries that he's a bit malnourished these days. He also takes 2 naps, but that's about it. There's a few other phone conversations and so forth. The conversation that he has with Linda includes some talk about, what some of the artists that they know are up to and complaints about their ailing bodies and all that sort of thing. But like I said, nothing that explosive is revealed.
It sounds a little bit like, in some ways, like the work by Georges Perec that you were talking about when we were together last time, where it's just observing what's happening on a street over a long period of time, like day by day, except this is really different in that there's this conversational quality.
You're absolutely right. One of the things that I was thinking as I was trying to decide what I wanted to say about this book was, all right, this book is an interview. Is this interview more interesting, more literary, more artsy, more anything than any other interview? And it has, I think, a different texture than most interviews that you're going to read. And part of that is from what you just were suggesting, like how it connects with that Perec book, because she's really interested in finding out like how people fill their days. She talks about that at one point. He says, I often have the feeling that in my day, nothing much happens, that I've wasted it. All I did was spend 2 hours with Ginsberg. This takes a day? And she says, well, that's why I'm doing this, actually, to find out how people fill up their days, because I myself feel like I don't do anything much all day. And there's this really interesting tension between wanting that sense of like ordinariness and understanding that ordinary nature of what people do over the course of their day, while also still wanting it to be kind of an interesting conversation, enough to the point that like she did a bunch of other conversations with people and found them too lacking in that certain something that she's looking for. She had in her other novel, she had 1,500 pages of it. Like, what made these 250 pages that she ended up with the good ones? Like, what is that quality? And yeah, I think there's some sort of like ordinariness, but that is somehow heightened is part of what's going on.
Is the conversation in the book feel like very balanced, or is it more like, I can put it, like almost like a portrait? Does it feel like it's focused mainly on one or the other, or is it focused mainly on Peter Hujar, or is it really like balanced? Does it feel to you when you read it?
It is very much focused on Peter Hujar, but she is part of the conversation regularly and often teasing him out in different directions, I suppose, or, putting a counterpoint on it or agreeing with him. He doesn't go on and on for pages without her saying something, but most of her statements are a sentence or two long. And he will speak in, I say he'll speak in paragraphs. They're sometimes not structured like that, but they're as long as a paragraph. One of the other things about this book is that they recently turned it into a movie, which is wild, for one thing, because it is just an interview in a sense. But director Ira Sachs and the star who plays Peter Hujar, Ben Whishaw, got really excited about this book. And the idea of recreating this conversation struck them as an interesting thing to do.
Yeah, it's so neat. It's almost like reverse engineering, right? Like you don't have the audio recordings, you have a transcript, so you're going to go recreate not just the audio, but the whole conversation in some way.
Yeah, and it came out last year, and I know you've seen it because it's on your Letterboxd.
Yeah, no. Well, when we were talking about you mentioned to me that you were going to discuss this book, and you mentioned that the movie existed, and so I checked, and it was available. I thought, yeah, it was really interesting to watch. I'm eager to hear about your thoughts about it and how it relates to the book.
Well, it is the book. I mean, the conversation in the book has been slightly pared down to make it a bit more of a movie. So like a little bit at the very beginning is cut out. A little bit here and there might be moved. Also, they're acting, so it's not like word for word, but it's very close. Like they are following the script. I think there's one little interpolation that they've added something towards the end that I caught when they were talking about Joan Crawford. I don't remember that from the book, but like it's hooked onto a part of the conversation that absolutely is in the book. So I don't know. I don't know what that is. But like overall, you more or less read the book by seeing the movie. So
well, I really wondered about that because with the movie, one of the things that's so striking and so visible in the movie is that it's not just a conversation between two people. It's a conversation between two people who know each other well.
Yes.
Like who have a certain kind of intimacy. You know, I don't mean like sexual intimacy. I mean, but like a interpersonal kind of, like there's a relationship underneath it. And in film, it comes across very clearly. So I was wondering about in the transcription of the conversation, if it's kind of visible there in some sense too.
The movie has, as you say, a few moments of physical intimacy where they're sort of lying on her bed, you know, on each other.
Or holding hands or, you know, like the way people are who are close, right?
Yeah, exactly. That we don't see so much in the book. There are no stage directions in the book. And unlike the movie, we don't break it up for listening to Mozart's Requiem or anything, or having a dance party for a few minutes, or going out to the roof for a smoke. The movie sort of presents this conversation as happening over the course of an entire day, when the book sort of makes it feel like it took a few hours to talk, and that they probably didn't pick up and move every so often for visual interest. And that's fine. I mean, movies are different. But you do get that kind of emotional intimacy in as much as they are very honest with each other. Peter Hujar is completely open to her and is trying. It's really interesting. There's a tremendous amount of like trust and openness between them, right? And in terms of the conversation, I think one of the things that Linda Rosenkrantz liked about how this conversation came out is that they're not doing cartwheels to amuse each other or amuse a potential reader someday. Though, you know, they do amuse each other, but they're not like putting on a show. And they're not like there's a documentary project of like trying to write down or record everything that happened, but they're also not obsessed with that. They're able to digress. They're able to talk about other things that might have happened at other times. And they're not incredibly worried about, wait, what happened between 4 and 5? Like they're not getting fixated on it. It's just there's an artistic project that they're going to follow. And through this process, by believing in the process, but not being strict about the process, they're going to come up with something. And I guess similarly, they're not trying for like radical soul-breaking honesty. It's not like we're going to, you know, have a major breakthrough that's going to reveal new things about their character and you know, like the dream fantasy of the most successful therapists meeting or whatever. Like that's not what's going on. But they are trying to be as honest as possible with each other. And you know, he catches himself making a misstatement. You know, he says, oh, I went back for my nap and I was wearing my clothes. And then I got up and then I put my clothes back on. And she says, no, you said you had gone to sleep in your clothes. And he's like, oh yeah, no, I guess I lied. And she's like, you might have put your shoes on. I was like, yeah, maybe. And they try to like, and they let it drop because it's not important, but it is important at the same time. And there's something about that quality of them both sort of understanding what they're trying to do that I think comes through.
Yeah. There's this one part of the movie, and I assume this is also the same text that's in the book, in the transcript, where he's talking about portraiture. And he's talking in particular about how difficult it was to deal with taking the photograph of Allen Ginsberg. And he's talking more generally about when he's taking portraits and how important it is that there's a kind of I can't remember the word he uses, like an openness, that people are interested or make themselves open or available to each other in some way. And that can be understood in kind of a sexualized way, but it's also like more generally, that's how that has to be there for the portrait to work. And I found myself wondering if there's a way in which what's happening in the conversation itself is like a portrait of the photographer, like that in words as opposed to like through the camera. Did it strike you that way as well?
Absolutely. So yes, as you say, like the main event is he's going to take this photo of Ginsberg. Ginsberg puts him through the ringer, keeps wanting to talk politics, isn't like looking at him, doesn't want to accept that he's also a person, much less an artist who's doing a similar kind of work. And so there's this like emotional wall, and Ginsberg can't see Hujar, so Hujar can't get a good photograph of Ginsberg.
Exactly.
And that is the opposite of what's happening between Hujar and Rosenkrantz.
Exactly.
And I also think like that is a reasonable thing for Hujar to say based on his other photos. I took a look at some of his work, which I wasn't as familiar with, and it turns out is great. His photographs are generally black and white, square. Many of them are portraits, but not all of them. And they both are very they tend to be very simple, like very well composed, a few elements in them. And also, especially with his portraits, that he really gets an interesting expression on people's faces where they're not, like I said, they're not putting on a show for each other. They're not smiling for the camera. They're not usually mugging for the camera. It's hard to articulate what the emotion is in the photo, but there's something there. Like you feel like you're getting some sort of their personality coming through.
Yeah. Flipping through some of the photos you shared, they tend to be looking at him in a way that, I don't know, suggests they know each other. Like there's something shared there.
Yeah. You can, listeners, when you have a moment, you can go to peterhujararchive.com. There'll be a link in the show notes, and you can see a very representative sample of his images there. I think he really was clearly going for some authentic almost seems like both the right and the wrong word. It sounds cheap when I put it in this context, but that is kind of the thing of some sort of connection, of having that moment of connection, of vulnerability, let's say, with the subject, and therefore being able to get something that you wouldn't expect to get from a photograph other than a posed photograph, if you see what I mean. And I think Rosenkrantz is doing the same thing through this conversational technique.
Yeah. One of the things that's striking in the photos, too, is many, not all, but many of them, people are either lying down or partway lying down, or, you know what I mean? They're kind of like, if you're alert and defensive, you sit up and you sit up straight. But if you're comfortable with somebody, you take this other kind of, posture. And it's interesting to see how the photos reflect that.
Yeah. The self-portrait of Peter Hujar that's on the cover of the book is him shirtless, possibly completely naked. You only see from his waist up, lying on his bed, hands sort of behind his head, if you see what I mean, and looking into the camera with this look that is like halfway sultry, halfway accusatory, halfway questioning. I don't know. It's a really interesting look. It's like a lot of the expressions that he captures. It's hard to pin down exactly what's going on, but it's a very compelling, emotive, expressive look. And it also is just a simply composed shot. It's again black and white. It's sort of the light white of his bed, the sort of slightly darker white or pale taupe color of the wall maybe, and then his body in between with very dark hair patches going on. And a lot of the photos really play off the black and white compositionally, really interestingly, because he also has done some other photos, including a lot of cityscapes that are lovely formal patterns
love those,
of the Art Deco.
I have to say. I mean, the portraits
so
are good, but I love the cityscapes.
They're so good, and I like a lot of his work. I went through a period where I tried to take photographs and be interesting, and I tried to do some of the I recognized some of the things that I was going for in these photos, and he's doing it far better than I ever did. But I felt a certain sympathy in what I was trying to get done. I wasn't as good. Straight up. That's fine.
But having that experience of doing photography kind of gives you, insight into the process, what it's like to, let's say, develop your own film and to have the kind of precision that you need to have to get exactly the effect you want.
Yeah, exactly. So the other thing that I was thinking about this film, right, was that it's a weird film in many ways. And because nothing happens, so to speak, in the conversation, like it doesn't build to anything. It's not very filmic per se.
No.
But it is very process in that art world sense, right? And the film, I think, also is a really interesting process of like recreating the look of New York in 1974 and the accents. My word, they're both British actors. Like they do a great job, especially Ben Whishaw with the accent.
She's not as good, but like he's perfect. I was just like so pleased.
She's fine, but not as good. He's amazing.
I know.
It's such a weird...
It was so satisfying.
And he does such a good job of like inhabiting the character and moving around in this very patient, deliberate way that, I don't know anything about Peter Hujar as a person. So I can't say how like accurate it was if I had known him, if people who knew him can remember that. But yeah.
That's a neat question. And also his apartment. I was looking around just a little bit, some basic information about his life. He had, I think, moved into the apartment he was living at the time of this recording in 1974, not too long before. And he'd set it up as a work space as well as a living space. And apparently it was remarkable. It was a remarkable space. And so it was interesting to think about the film as kind of, I don't know, almost as the living space being another character in a way, or some really important element in the conversation.
Yes, though I think, well, first off, it's interesting because there are some photos that he took of his place in the book. But I also think that the film is supposed to be at her apartment.
Oh, is that right?
I think so, but I could be wrong.
I thought it was supposed to be his apartment, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, the photos of his apartment look a lot more austere, let's say. But either way, it doesn't matter. It does a lovely job of that. Although they're on the roof smoking in December in New York. I'm surprised they didn't put on more clothes.
This is 100% my reaction. I said this out loud to my son when we were watching this. I was like, they don't have enough clothes on for December. This is impossible.
Maybe it was a warm December. I'm sure they did their research. This is an obsessive movie because, like I said, it's about process. It's about recreating this moment and trying to put the ums and ahs back in and trying to get the texture of it for the sake of doing that, for the sake of recreating these people. And, Peter Hujar became more famous after his passing.
Yeah, because he only published the one book, right?
I believe only one book came out during his life. A terrific book called Portraits in Life and Death, the first half of which are portraits of some people you might recognize, John Waters, Susan Sontag, William S. Burroughs, poets like John Ashbery and Anne Waldman. But, and then the other half are photos that he took inside of catacombs of skulls. And it's a little obvious, but also a little interesting. You know what I mean?
Super interesting. I mean, a little pseudo, but also really interesting. And he'd taken those at a very different time. I think he'd taken the catacomb pictures back in the 60s, earlier 60s.
Yeah, like 10 years earlier. Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think it's a really interesting choice. And the photos are beautiful, but also the idea of like the way that you're taking a portrait of a person, a living person, let's say, and then how is he thinking about this when he's taking a photo of a skull in a catacombs, right? And the similarities of approach and of granting a kind of personhood and compositional logic to the skulls / to the bodies, right? To the bodies of the people seems really there's interesting parallels. It's interesting to put it together while also feeling a little bit memento mori kind of obvious. But that's okay. Sometimes a big obvious structure still allows lots of interesting details to come through.
And he did get Susan Sontag to do the preface.
Yes, he did. Good for him. I think she wrote it pretty quickly, but that's okay. So Hujar sadly passed away in, I believe, 1987 from AIDS, and he only really became well-known after that, which means that we don't have as much sort of archival photos or images or memories of him the way that we might have with, we all know what Andy Warhol looks and sounds and moves like. So when you see David Bowie playing Andy Warhol in a movie, you're like, he's doing it pretty good, Andy Warhol or not, or whatever you feel about it. And we, as in, you and me, don't have access to that kind of sense of what Hujar was like as a person moving through the world. We have his artistic sensibility from his photographs and his conversation as captured in this document, in this book, but we don't have a sense of like his embodiment, I don't think. And this movie seems like it's a way of providing us with that, of like fleshing out Peter Hujar as a person for people who didn't get to meet him, while the people who did know him, like Linda Rosenkrantz, are still around and with us and can give people like Ben Whishaw feedback on their performance and hopefully make it more accurate as this sort of thing can be.
Yeah.
It feels like this movie's interested in that sort of thing.
Maybe she even said, it was a really warm December. We didn't have to wear our coats.
It's you can look that up. That information's in the public record. You can find out what the weather forecast was for that day.
Yeah. One of the things that was interesting about the movie is that, it's fairly short. It's like 75 minutes or something like that, which is really short for a feature. And I was looking around and I saw that the director, Ira Sachs, had apparently been thinking about whether it should be a short or a feature. And it was Ben Wishaw's commitment to the part and really wanting to do it, like that led them to develop it into the longer format. Do you feel like it works, or do you feel like it should have been like a 40-minute short?
I feel like it works, although I also feel like it is a bit long for people who aren't on board, right? And I'm just reading comments that people have made about it.
It seems a little polarizing.
It seems like people who are expecting it to be a movie rather than an art piece, let's say, are a little disappointed. And obviously it's both. And this book and this conversation can't make a good movie. Like it just doesn't have that structure. And the fact that they edited parts of it out to make it fit into that is kind of an interesting choice. I think they had to, simply to make it something closer to a movie for people to watch. And they don't do it so much that it really detracts from the idea of like recreating the conversation. But it's an interesting half measure, let's say. Although I will say also, one of my favorite movies is My Dinner with Andre.
I was just going to say, that's the movie I immediately thought of after I watched this.
Of course. And so the idea of having just a movie where people talk and are well shot, like the cinematography is pretty interesting. And that movie, My Dinner with Andre, has significantly more shape to it. It's not a real conversation as well. It's, it's scripted.
And stuff happens enough, like things come in, conversational turns happen that you don't feel bored or tuned out or anything like that.
I mean, I certainly don't.
No, me neither.
But and this one, because it's real, so to speak, it's more non-fictional in that sense. It doesn't sustain that.
Yeah.
And if you don't care about the New York art scene of the 70s, you're also going to have a harder time getting into it.
That's true.
But I think it's great that they made it.
Yeah.
They made it for themselves, and it feels like they made it for me. And what more can you want from a piece of art?
I totally agree with you. And, one of the things about the film for me that was so striking is that, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, you have that sense of people who are comfortable with each other, who have this kind of intimacy with one another. And that comes across in their conversation, but it also comes across in all these choices with the lighting and the framing and all this kind of stuff that gives you this kind of very beautiful emotional texture. And I really like that about that film a lot. I have a close relationship with silence, with things withheld, things known and not said. I am sure that no one said anything to me, for example, before I went into that room where I saw my father after the operation. And no one mentioned afterward that we would not easily be able to understand his speech, and that my speech was also a problem. What was there to say? And we lived like that for 3.5 years. We got used to it. And then in July 1967, my father died. So Colm Tóibín's On Elizabeth Bishop is sometimes described as an introduction to the work of the poet Elizabeth Bishop, but I think it's actually something very different. Or maybe it's just a very odd kind of introduction. Elizabeth Bishop's poems and the circumstances of her life are the central point around which the whole book revolves. And you realize this when, after the first couple of chapters, which include a very careful reading of some of her poems and a detailed description of the Nova Scotia landscape that she grew up in, Tóibín suddenly begins to talk about himself. He writes, I come from a house where time's hand had also reached in. Toward the end of 1963, when I was 8, in the town of Enniscorthy in the southeast of Ireland, I arrived home from school one day to find both of my parents standing still, looking into a mirror. it becomes clear that Tóibín is juxtaposing his own life and writing with that of Bishop. But he also juxtaposes Bishop's life and writing with a whole constellation of other writers, including those she was closest to, such as Robert Lowell and Marianne Moore, and those who, in Tóibín's mind, are a suitable foil, especially George Herbert and Tom Gunn. So Colm Tóibín is himself known as a writer of fiction, both novels and short stories. He's born in 1955 and still very active in the world. His most famous novel is probably The Master, which is a fictionalized biography of Henry James, and it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. And I am very curious to read The Master at some point because I love Henry James, and I'm really eager to see how Tóibín handles him. I have to confess that this, on Elizabeth Bishop, is the only book of Tóibín's I've read, but I really like his style. Or maybe I really like the way he makes connections between landscape and life experience and language, and I'm really eager to read more. Have you read any of his work?
I haven't. I did pick my way through the first couple chapters of On Elizabeth Bishop today, just in preparation for this. It's been a book that I've been kind of meaning to read. My husband read it many years ago. I think picked it up for largely the same reasons that you did. I think I might have picked it up for him and put it in his hand and said, you should buy this. Tempted by the seductive physical size of it.
Yeah. You got to wonder how many people have just fallen prey to this, feel this book in the hand. It's a little bit narrow. Feels perfect.
Yeah. And it's a nice hardcover. I don't know. You have a hardcover of that as well?
I have the exact same one.
It feels very good. Mm-hmm. And also because both he and I are big fans of Elizabeth Bishop, whose complete poems, which Elizabeth Bishop was a poet who was very exacting in her writing, let's say, and would worry over her poems for a long, long time. She would sometimes spend decades fiddling with the poem until all the words were just as she wanted them. And so her complete poems is, it's in one volume and it's 200-something pages long, but it's very generous with the type size and the white space and the layout and so forth. She did not leave behind a huge corpus of poetry. Mm. But that was the first book of poems that I ever bought for myself. Or at least maybe I bought Leaves of Grass first or something like that. But it was one of the earliest ones I ever bought for myself, certainly.
How did you come to her work? It was early in life, you said.
Yeah, I don't remember why exactly I went for her first, except that I think I knew about some of her most famous poems, like One Art, which I think many people know, even if they don't know that that's the title of it. It is a very short, sort of emotionally explosive little poem with an interesting formal structure. Mm-hmm. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seemed filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. If you don't know it, go look it up, but you probably do know it. Yeah.
No, it's wonderful. And it has this beautiful kind of, oral quality to it, faster, vaster, things like that. There are these, it reminds me of Marvell in the way it sounds, the way the language kind of turns back on itself in this really almost, I don't want to say musical way, but this very harmonious way. You're talking about her making sure every word is exactly where she wants it, even if that takes decades to do. And that quality, I think, is really distinctive.
Yeah, she's attracted to these sort of complicated forms. That's a villanelle. She also has written a few sestinas, which is a form where each stanza has 6 lines and the ending words permute. Mm-hmm. They come in different orders for each of 6 stanzas until you have a little envoy at the end where you put all 6 words in 3 lines.
Just like bell ringing.
Yeah, it's exactly like bell ringing, like we talked about a while ago.
Yeah.
And so that sort of thing appealed to me. Mm-hmm. I find her to be a really interesting mix of very formal play and very accessible emotional content, let's say. She's very interested in little epiphanies sometimes.
Yeah, I kind of was aware of her work for a long time, and I still even now haven't read a whole lot of it, but I stumbled across this one of her poems. Well, I'm now very fond of a few of her poems, but I stumbled across this one of her poems that is one of my favorite things that I've ever read, and I don't know if you can guess what it is.
Yes, you mentioned that you had a favorite poem of hers. The poem of hers that I thought might be the one that you like is called Poem.
Ah.
It is, I guess it's not that one. Poem is about her finding a small painting and sort of piecing together what's in the painting. It must be Nova Scotia. Only there does one see gabled wooden houses painted that awful shade of brown. And then 3rd stanza, about halfway through the poem, Heavens, I recognize the place. I know it. It's behind, I can almost remember the farmer's name, his barn backed onto that meadow. There it is, titanium white, one dab. And then goes on to think more about her relationship. The fact that she and the painter are probably the only two who could look at this painting and know where it is, and her relationship with that place. So that kind of ekphrastic writing and that moment of like, oh, wait, like suddenly you are pulled into the painting as she knows where it is. I thought that would greatly appeal to you.
That is a very great one. And it's clearly one that Tóibín really loves because the last chapter of the book is him coming back to the landscapes that he knows best in Ireland and talking about a particular painting that he encountered that was done at this particular location. And it's a very beautiful triangulation where he's sort of talking through that poem, the poem of Elizabeth Bishop's, but he's framing his own experience and his own memory of experience through her poem, which is really kind of cool. But no, the favorite poem of hers, which is one of my favorite poems of all time, is North Haven. Do you know that one?
I mean, I've read it. Let me look it up. Let me see which one that is.
It's this elegiac poem. I'm going to read the last few stanzas of it because I can't resist. The goldfinches are back, or others like them, and the white-throated sparrow's five-note song, pleading and pleading, brings tears to the eyes. Nature repeats herself, or almost does. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Revise, revise, revise. Years ago, you told me it was here. In 1932, you first discovered girls and learned to sail and learned to kiss. You had such fun, you said, that classic summer. Fun, it always seemed to leave you at a loss. You left North Haven anchored in its rock afloat in mystic blue, and now you've left for good. You can't derange or rearrange your poems again. But the sparrows can their song. The words won't change again. Sad friend, you cannot change. It's a poem she wrote about a year after the death of Robert Lowell, a poet also, that she was very close with. And I just find it so moving. I really love that poem.
Yeah, it's interesting because Robert Lowell was a very different poet from Elizabeth Bishop.
Super different. Do you like his work?
Not over much, no.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about it because it's like kind of turns back on itself. But she had this really interesting kind of relationship with him over a long, long period of time. And Tóibín writes about that in a really interesting way.
What sort of things does he pull out of their relationship?
Well, like so many things, but I guess the most interesting thing is the ways in which the structure of the book itself reflects the relationships of Bishop's life, but also the ways in which Tóibín is giving you a sense, like the book is on the one and the same time a poetical biography of Bishop, right? So he's going to talk about the poems. He's going to take apart the poems in this really interesting way, analyze them, break them apart, talk about her life and her development over time. But he's also giving you a kind of an autobiography of himself as a writer. So the biography of the poet is simultaneously kind of an autobiography of the novelist. But it also, a third thing, is a kind of a group portrait involving the figures that Bishop herself was close to, especially Robert Lowell and Marianne Moore, but also connecting to other poets and writers that make sense to connect to Bishop, that somehow offer a kind of a foil for understanding her work, and writers that are meaningful clearly for Tóibín himself. So, for example, some of the reviewers, I remember seeing a reviewer of this book saying they didn't understand why Tom Gunn was being written about so much. That seemed kind of crazy, and there was like too much of that. And I think the reason that's there is because Tom Gunn is really, really important for Tóibín. So the structure of the book is absolutely fascinating. So as I mentioned earlier, you start out where it's focused really the first couple of chapters just on Bishop. And then there's a chapter that's about himself. It kind of really just turns into this autobiographical thing. And you think for a minute, like, what is going on here? And then when you get to the end of that chapter, you can see him you come around the bend of the road and you can see how he's lining up his experience with hers in certain really interesting ways. And then the following chapter after that, he starts bringing Robert Lowell into it. And Lowell kind of comes in and out over and over again throughout the entire book. And many different writers show up, more minor points of comparison. Tom Gunn, as I mentioned, appears at length. And then as we get close to the end of the book, they kind of get braided together so that you get a detailed, incredibly interesting, very long chapter about Bishop and Lowell. And then this very elegiac chapter that is in large part about North Haven, about that poem that I was describing. Like it's sort of written through that poem almost. And then we come back out to Tom Gunn again. So it's kind of getting back into that sort of personal space, then an intervening chapter on Marianne Moore, who was important for Bishop late in life. That feels a little bit like an interruption, I have to say. But he's committed to this biographical structure, right? And then a closing chapter that's again focused on the self. It opens, I am in Wexford now. So it's him back in his landscape as he's sort of been positioning her in her landscape. So the whole structure of the book is incredibly interesting. If you imagine a thing that's braided together, and there's always Bishop, there's always autobiography. Lowell is there a lot. And then there's all these other figures. There's Seamus Heaney, there's James Joyce, there's Richard Crashaw, the poet Wyatt, Tom Gunn, of course, Gary Snyder, Marianne Moore. There's all these figures, and it's just like this complex structure. I think it's a really interesting book.
It's interesting because, Bishop had her relationships with these writers, Lowell and Moore in particular, sort of most obvious, even just by, reading through her poems, not reading her biography. But, she spent quite a lot of her life away from all that. I mean, still writing, but she's lived for decades in Brazil.
Yeah. He has a really interesting couple of chapters about her time in Brazil. And I haven't read, I'd like to read other biographies of her to get a clearer sense of that time and what that meant for her. He brings out her personal relationships, especially the woman she was living with when she was there, and the kind of political context that they were both embedded in, and how that became increasingly, I don't know what to say, untenable, so that it doesn't come as a surprise when Bishop moves back to the U.S.
Right.
But I feel like I don't know enough about how other biographers have treated that period of her life to know how he's going to unpack it. I suspect it's probably, he's so good at talking about writers in relationship to other writers that I'm not sure if his depiction of other kinds of interpersonal relationships are kind of up to that level. But, who knows?
Yeah, there was a moment early in the book where he talks about the moment right before the first biography comes out. When Elizabeth Bishop is somebody whose text you can read. I think she had just passed, and, he's young, he's getting into her. But, you don't know her fully, you know what I mean? But you don't know her as a person yet because there isn't an official biography. It's hard to get that kind of details. The letters haven't all been published yet. We don't have the access to that sort of thing, which is an interesting moment to think about, considering that a lot of that has been published or written now. And I mean, will still be published. There's, you can never stop talking about these things. But thinking about it in comparison with Peter Hujar, who we were just talking about, where right now that apparatus is starting to roll out. But for a while there, he was an artist that you could get interested in, but not be able to get much of the texture of his life unless you talk with people who knew him. He encountered Elizabeth Bishop in that way at one point, whereas even when I got to her, in the early 90s, she was already much more mediated. Even if I didn't read the biography, the people who were writing introductions, the people who were writing essays about her where I might have heard about her, the conversation about her was much more mediated through that apparatus of understanding more about her life and having built up narratives around it.
Yeah.
And I guess I find that moment before that happens really interesting.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, because it opens up that space to let whether it's a poet or another kind of writer or another kind of artist, it allows you to experience them mediated through their creative production, right? And so it's a very different experience of their mind and their way of feeling and all that.
And I don't want to suggest that is a purer way to read them or anything,
no.
But it's an interesting way to read them.
It's different.
And it can be hard to get back to that state once the cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So this sounds like it was a very interesting project for Tóibín, and made an interesting book, which I should sit down and read at some point. It's been on my list forever, and it did seem worth poking through. Yeah.
And I think, it's just under 200 pages, but it's also very readable. I read it in one sitting. I found it very smooth,
Yes.
Very, he writes beautifully. He has beautiful texture to his writing. And like I said, there's this kind of braided structure to the book that really takes you along, which I found really satisfying. And also I find it so interesting the ways in which he's kind of, like I said, kind of writing through the poems. So that closing chapter that I mentioned in the book, where he's talking about his own experience of looking at this painting by an artist called Tony O'Malley. So he's describing He says, some years ago, a friend let me know that there was a small painting by Tony O'Malley for sale in an auction in Dublin, and I should go look at it. I recognized the scene as soon as I saw the painting, right? And so he unpacks that at length, right? And later in that, near the end of the book, he says, Tony O'Malley saw it, this scene, in 1952, and I saw it some years later. Both of us looked at it. He must have studied it closely to get it as exact as he did. It must have mattered to him to make a painting from precise looking and rendering, or finding shapes and colors that would approximate what he saw, but capture it, envision it, recreate it. I never looked at it like that. It was part of what was normal, what was there, but I remember it.
Mm.
And so, and then in the very last couple of lines of this chapter, this closing chapter, he then quotes Elizabeth Bishop's poem, Our Visions Coincided, right? He quotes her. Visions is too serious a word. Our looks, two looks, art copying from life. And life itself. Life and the memory of it so compressed they've turned into each other. So it's kind of neat, right? So he's like, it's very personal, like I said, very autobiographical, but he's filtering it through her. And similarly with this like elegiac chapter, I keep thinking of it as that is just a little bit before the end of the book, where he is sort of talking about Bishop and Lowell through North Haven, through that poem that I really love. But he then also brings into that chapter Tom Gunn and the ways in which Tom Gunn's poetry shifted in the context of the AIDS crisis.
Right.
So he talks about how Gunn was moving toward a looser style in his poems, and then how he didn't publish a book of poems between 1982 and 1992. But then he quotes Gunn writing in the Times Literary Supplement about the poetry of Sir Thomas Wyatt, right? So 16th century poet, some of whose works had reemerged after, being lost for a long period of time. And Tóibín says this, Gunn looked in particular at a number of Wyatt poems that did not come to light until 1961. These were elegies for some of Wyatt's friends executed with Anne Boleyn by Henry VIII. The range of Wyatt's feeling, Gunn wrote, is considerable, for he thinks as he grieves. And then he kind of unpacks it. So he's clearly, how can I put it? He's unpacking Bishop's writing of elegy with regard to Lowell and also her other terrible losses, like the loss of her parents at a young age. So he's talking about those losses through the figure of Tom Gunn, writing about the losses of friends and relations in the AIDS crisis, which Tóibín's experience is also bound up with, and talking about that through Gunn's writing about Wyatt's poems about the death of his friends in this political crisis. So it's like this very intricate set of relationships, right? And these people are connected to one another over time through, I don't know, I keep thinking about Dante's Limbo. Where there's all, where there's all these.
Yes, where the poets are hanging out.
Yeah, all the poets are there, right? From all these different periods of time, like classical antiquity, and they invite Dante to join them and so on. Like, they're all there because they're there outside of time in some strange kind of way, right? They can be together in this space, when you're in the other world, in the afterlife, right?
Yeah, or when you're in an essay.
Yeah, and here too, right? They're all together in this kind of other room.
Yeah.
I find it absolutely intriguing. Anyway, so it's definitely worth reading. I think you'll find it interesting.
Now, I'm curious, and I'm just throwing this at you, so it's okay if you don't have an answer. But you seem really intrigued by the structure and form of how this is put together. Is this something that is tempting to you as a form to model a piece of writing on? Is it something where there is a text or a writer that you might want to do this kind of autobiographical weaving together of different strands of thought and writing and tradition together into a pattern because you feel that there might be connected? Like, is that texture, is that weaving seem like something that is inspiring you to want to make something in that mode?
I'll tell the inspiration and the desire are absolutely there. Like, I wasn't even conscious of it, but you're absolutely right. Because it's I think one of the reasons I respond to this book so much is it's a kind of writing I really admire and would like to do and have kind of thought about off and on also for decades. So I don't know if I'm capable of it, but I love this approach, right? This idea that, you can kind of lift these poets out, or other kinds of writers out of their settings and put them in this sort of, like I said, constellation and relationship to one another. And that is a profoundly true way to talk about your own experience. It sounds kind of crazy, right? Because like, how would it be the case that you talk better about your own experience by talking through other people's experience and poetic production? But I think it is. For some reason, I think it's an incredibly powerful way to do that.
All right. Those were some fun books that you can read in a day. So listeners, I guess we have no excuse now. What else do you have going on? Is there anything else that is exciting you?
I have to be absolutely honest. The thing that's exciting me most is today when I was outside, I saw that this little creek that runs next to a road by where I live appears to be melting.
Oh, yes.
And then I heard some birds singing in this really enthusiastic way. And I'm like, yes, this winter will end at some point. So that's the main thing I'm excited about.
The massive icicle that was dangling off our roof in the little way between ours and our neighbor's house that you had to go through to get to the backyard and all that finally fell. And so it is no longer a threat. It is now.
And no one was under it.
And it's good. We were saved when we took photos of it. It was huge. So yes, the winter does seem to be ending. That's lovely. It's gotten back above 0 Celsius. That's lovely. What exciting things do I have going on? I will be seeing a play tomorrow, hopefully. I don't remember what it is, but and by the time people hear this, it will have been a few days ago, but maybe I'll have something to talk about next time. And also any day now, I will be going to see the new Wuthering Heights movie that everybody's all up in a tizzy about.
I was going to say, people have different views about that. I saw the trailer. I haven't seen the film yet.
Yeah, I haven't either. And I'm not going to say much about it until I see it. But, it is my husband's favorite book or one of his favorite books.
Yeah,
so
no, you have to go.
We simply must see it.
You have to go.
And, we are neither of us necessarily wedded to the idea that an adaptation has to be a perfect replication of what's going on in the book in any way, shape, or form.
Completely agree. It's especially with a well-trodden, like a novel that's out there and a bunch of adaptations already. You want to do something interesting with it. Like, I think one of my all-time favorite adaptations is Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, which is, pretty out there.
Yeah.
Right? So you should be. But I wonder. I don't know.
Oh, wait, that doesn't mean that the movie's going to be any good.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I've never seen anything by this director before. People have opinions. Mm-hmm. Fine. I'm just, I'm curious. I've heard people love the soundtrack, so that's nice. Mm-hmm. We'll see. We shall see.
I hope you guys will report.
Yeah, maybe you'll hear back from that next time around.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, hopefully this cold will go away and I'll feel up to reading proper books again.
Yeah.
But until then, listeners, if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at spouter@megaphonic.fm. We would love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you supporting us on Patreon, and patrons get to hang out with us in a friendly Discord, where you'll get to hear my opinions on Wuthering Heights much faster. Find out more at patreon.com/megaphonic. Show notes with links for anything we've mentioned in this episode are at megaphonic.fm/spouter/90, and the Spouter-Inn is one of the fancy little podcasts over at Megaphonic FM. So, until next time,
see you again at the Spouter-Inn.